temperatures around 20 and the wind's quite light. A bright end of the day for southern Scotland as dusk approaches. Light winds and dry weather, feeling pleasant. Temperatures around 17 to 19. On the cloudy side, if we head over to Northern Ireland for this evening, and we're told scattered showers across the country. Some of those on the heavy side. Temperatures about 17. So lots of places across the UK remaining dry overnight tonight. Some clear spells, though a few showers for some in the north. And that's how the weather's shaping up.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Police investigating the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell have warned that anyone withholding information is protecting killers. The 9-year-old was shot by a gunman on Monday when he chased his intended target into her home in Liverpool. 2 men who were arrested on suspicion of murder have been released on bail, with one of them being recalled to prison for breaching the terms of his licence. Merseyside police are pleading to anyone with information to come forward, saying silence is not an option.
We've got a 9-year-old girl who won't celebrate her 18th birthday. She won't celebrate her wedding. She won't have children of her own. If you've got information and you're withholding it, you're protecting the killers. We need your information.
A huge package of financial support has been promised by the government to help struggling households through the energy crisis. The Prime Minister has written an article in the Daily Mail newspaper where he acknowledged bills are going to be eye-watering and the next few months are going to be tough. He said colossal sums of taxpayers' money is already being used to help people, and his successor will announce more support in the next month. Well, the two Tory leadership candidates are yet to reveal exactly how they plan to ease the cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised reports that Liz Truss plans to cut VAT by 5%, describing it as incredibly regressive. It's understood the Foreign Secretary has discussed a nuclear option with her advisers, which would reportedly save the average household more than £1,300 a year. Mr Sunak's campaign says the move would cost more than £30 billion. Meanwhile, Ms Truss has vowed to bolster Britain's defences if she becomes Prime Minister, saying the era of complacency is over. She wants to push ahead with renewing Trident and strengthening support for intelligence services as part of her plan to protect the UK. Retired British Army officer Major General Tim Cross told GB News, with Russia a continued threat, Britain needs to reconsider its defence and foreign policies.
Over these last 20 years, we have become complacent. We never really put sufficient resources in terms of military into Iraq or Afghanistan, and we weren't prepared to stay there for the length of time that we had been involved in, for example, the Cold War. So I think we have been complacent, and what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, and indeed elsewhere, autocracies, dictatorships, China, and so on, has made people realise that we do need to think again about how we're going to engage in not just defence policy, but foreign policy and other aspects of our external relationships as well.
More than 25,000 migrants have now crossed the Channel so far this year. That's after 915 people were intercepted yesterday, the Ministry of Defence saying they were on board 19 small boats. Monday saw the highest daily total on record, with 1,295 people making the treacherous journey across from France. A father who was jailed for torturing his son has had his release from prison blocked. Tony Hudgell was so badly abused by his parents that he needed to have both legs amputated. Anthony Smith was due to be released next month, but his case was referred to the parole board under new powers to protect the public from dangerous offenders. Tony's adoptive mother has welcomed the intervention. Victims of the Grenfell Tower disaster are being remembered at the Notting Hill Carnival. Members of the Emancipated Run crew wore green T-shirts as the event returned to the streets of West London for the first time since 2019. Paying tribute to the 72 people who died in the fire, survivor Zoe Dainton told the crowd there's been little progress since the Grenfell inquiry.
5 years, still no justice, still no charges, not much change. And despite what happened at Grenfell, and despite endless evidence that came out of the inquiry, those responsible, including the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, seem to be suffering from amnesia and are acting like it's business as usual.
NASA's new space program is on course to launch its first mission on the moon. Conditions are expected to be favourable tomorrow, with the unmanned Artemis 1 due to lift off just after 1:30 UK time. If all goes well, astronauts will be back on the moon for the first time in over 50 years. The ultimate goal is to create a base camp. NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding says so far everything's going to plan.
Bottom line is we look really good, no issues, no concerns or constraints from the lightning events at this point. We've done the battery charging on both Orion and the core stage. Those are complete. So that's all going really well and all as planned and on schedule.
This is GB News. Do stay tuned.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for many. A few showers around, mainly in the north. Let's home in on that detail for you. So a dry end to the day across southwest England, with some bright or sunny spells ahead of dusk. Remaining a little breezy along the south coast, temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius. And a bright evening too across southeast London. Some hazy spells of sunshine, dry for all, an easterly breeze, temperatures the same, about 20. Continuing with the dry theme this evening for South Wales now, plenty of bright or sunny spells ahead of nightfall, temperatures around 21. And a fine and dry end of the day across the Midlands. Plenty of hazy sunshine ahead of sunset, we're told. Light winds making it feel rather pleasant. Temperatures sat at around 21 as well. A rather cloudy end to the day for the northeast of England, although there will be some glimmers of sunshine. Feeling fairly pleasant despite that cloud. Temperatures around 20 and the wind's quite light. A bright end to the day for southern Scotland as dusk approaches. Light winds and dry weather, feeling pleasant. Temperatures around 17 to 19. On the cloudy side, if we head over to Northern Ireland for this evening, and we're told scattered showers across the country. Some of those on the heavy side. Temperatures about 17. So lots of places across the UK remaining dry overnight tonight. Some clear spells, though a few showers for some in the north. And that's how the weather's shaping up.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined here in the studio by our very own Paul Embry. And joining us very shortly down the line is Arlene Foster in Northern Ireland. We're here, as always, for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we'll be talking about the newly announced energy price cap, which has been raised by 80%, as Chancellor Nadine Zahawi warns that households must try and reduce their energy consumption. This week, former Newsnight host Emily Maitlis hit out at the BBC, saying a rebuke she received from bosses for on-air remarks made in 2020 made no sense. She also alluded to Tory cronyism being at the heart of the company. Well, we'll be discussing those comments further. And as over 100,000 postal workers go on strike, we'll be joined by the Deputy General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. And as you know, we want to hear from you on The Political Correction, so if you want to get involved in our conversation and have your message read out on the show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Economists have warned that Britain is facing a year of double-digit inflation as energy bills continue to soar. On Friday, Ofgem announced that the energy price cap would rise from £1,971 to £3,549 a year from October the 1st, which is an 80% rise on the current cap, a cap which limits the amount that can be charged per unit of gas and electricity. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you here on this news, which was surely pretty shocking and depressing for millions who were already really worried about cost of living.
I think it's a national emergency, Deanna. I think millions of families risk being crippled by the increase in the cap, businesses as well. And I am concerned that the government has not got a grip of it. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for families to get through this winter. We're talking about bills potentially rising to an average of £3,500 after October. For millions of families, that is simply not going to be sustainable. And I think they are going to find themselves in a position between choosing whether to eat or whether to heat their homes. That's certainly going to be the situation facing, I think, many people. And we need to re-examine the elephant in the room, which is the whole question of energy independence. Mm-hmm. The fact that we do not have energy independence in this country is a national scandal. The fact that we have closed down so many of our coal-fired power stations too early, in my view. The fact that we have not got to grips with fracking and explored the potential for fracking. The fact that we were far too slow off the mark in terms of nuclear energy and are now paying a very, very heavy price for that. How can it be that a country, an advanced industrial country like Britain, does not have energy security, does not have energy independence? And I look at the fact that over the last couple of years, for example, we've seen energy ministers literally having PR photo shoots at coal-fired power stations saying, isn't it great that we are closing these stations down? Look, this station is being decommissioned to meet the green agenda. Well, fine. We all support the green agenda in principle, but if it means you find yourself a couple of years later in a situation where you are begging energy companies to keep supply going. I mean, there was a story recently about Kwasi Kwarteng effectively begging a particular energy company to keep its generators going. Then you've gone seriously wrong. So we need to have the debate in the short term about the impacts on families, the impacts on businesses, what we can do to alleviate that. But we need a much wider debate about how we ended up in the position where we are and what we're going to do about it in terms of energy security going forward.
Yeah, I know we've discussed energy security quite a lot on our show over the past kind of year since we started. One of the things that I want to just touch on, though, is some of the support that is available, because I think people are really, really worried, and actually a lot of people aren't actually aware of some of the support that is going to be coming their way. So I just want to run through. For pensioners who get a winter fuel payment, there'll be an additional £300 paid to them this winter when they get that winter fuel payment. For those with registered disabilities, an additional £150 cost of living payment, as well as a £650 cost of living payment for some of those who are on the lowest incomes. And that is as well as a £400 energy discount for every household, which I think from October it'll be about £66 a month taken off people's direct debit bills every month until March. So there is some support in place in the short term. It sounds as though both of those leadership contenders, be it Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, are willing to go further. But as you rightly said, Paul, that's the short-term stuff in terms of this winter. But Arlene, I want to come to you about the longer term, and that is, again, about energy security.
Well, yeah, and I just want to pick up on Paul's point, because when you're energy minister, there's three things that you have to consider. There's the security of supply, there's the cost of energy to consumers, and then there's the mix. And unfortunately, because of politics and because of pressure, we have allowed ourselves to look more at the mix. In other words, moving away from fossil fuels towards green energy. And we haven't taken into consideration the cost to consumers that will bring, and the impact on security of supply. Because I was just looking this morning, Deanna, at where we were getting energy from in GB this morning, and only 5% of our energy today comes from wind. The rest comes from gas-fired electricity plants, so that 60% is coming from that. And I mean, we have to ask ourselves, have we got ourselves into a situation because of the war in Ukraine, which is undoubtedly having an impact on the cost of wholesale gas and wholesale energy? But we should have had, if you like, a safety net in case some of these global events happened. But instead, we've been quite complacent in relation to our security of supply. And we find ourselves now in a position where we have this huge spike in the cost of energy, and some people individually are not going to be able to cope with it. And whilst there is a cap on domestic users, there's no cap for our small business users, and some businesses are going to go out of business. And after having to deal with COVID, which was a huge challenge to many businesses, as we know, because they had to close down and they were relying on government intervention, now they're in a situation that they're going to be faced with these huge energy bills, and government are going to have to intervene. I'm not a big interventionist, as you well know, Deanna, but they are going to have to intervene to help people through this short term. But in the medium to longer term, they're really going to have to sit back and look at the security of supply piece. And that means having a look again at net zero. I know it's something that people don't want to talk about, but we have to be sensible about this. Of course, we want to transition to more renewable sources of energy, but there has to be a transition. You can't just switch off things and then not expect there to be an impact.
Quite right. I think one of the interesting points on that in terms of transition as well is this move towards electric vehicles. There was a report out earlier this week saying that actually electric vehicles have always been pitched as this thing that's going to be much cheaper to run than a petrol car. And actually, given the way that energy prices are going, that's completely not going to be the case. Another point about transition and why we need to be much more savvy. Now, Labour are at odds with independent fact-checking charity Full Fact after it claimed the party's energy price cap freeze was underfunded by at least £5 billion. Labour responded by saying that the charity did not understand how direct debit works. So Keir Starmer said his party have a fully costed, comprehensive plan, which will be welcome news to so many people who are currently worried sick. So, Arlene, do you think that Labour's answer of a freeze on energy prices is the right answer? Do you think that's the right approach to the energy crisis?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that it's never a good thing to challenge a charity that spends its time looking at these sorts of things in great detail. But in any event, I do think that Keir Starmer, after he came back from his holiday, did capture the mood and rightly concentrated on energy costs and what they could do to deal with these issues. Because I think the Tory leadership election contest has dragged on for a long period of time. We're not hearing anything new from those hustings, Deanna. We hear the same speech every single time. We're hearing the same issues being dealt with internally in the Conservative Party, and that's fine. But at the same time, it has allowed Labour to come forward with this package, and whatever about the cost of it and whatever about how it works, it does look as if they are taking the initiative in dealing with the energy costs. And when you're in opposition, you can do that sort of thing. And certainly they have come forward at least with a policy, whatever about the costings of it. But for me, freezing the price of energy, and it goes back to our previous discussion, is only really a stopgap. We have to grapple with the real issues and look at why this has happened. What are the policies decision that has led us to here? Of course, there's been the intervention of the war in Ukraine, and that's going to have impacts as well. Not to go off on a tangent, but I spoke to a former president of Ukraine on Friday. I asked him, did he think that the support for war in Ukraine might go down in the UK because of the energy crisis? And he acknowledged that it was a real issue, the energy crisis. And that goes back to the comments from Nadhim Zawahiwi that Putin is using energy as a tool in this war, and he knows that it will have a real impact in the West. And that goes back to the fact that we're not energy independent because we're relying on other people who can then switch on and off the gas pipelines, and that has a real impact on the citizens here in the UK. So there has to be a complete rethink of energy policy, whoever is in number 10, and I hope that it will be the number one priority when they get in there.
Paul, I want to come to you on Labour's plan on this sort of price cap freeze. Do you think that it's actually kind of doable, or do you worry that it might put yet more energy suppliers out of business and actually exacerbate the problem?
I think it's all right as a stopgap, as Arlene said. I believe that freezing it is right. I think taxing the excess profits of the energy companies is the right thing to do as well. But in the long term, Deanna, I mean, I would call for the whole of energy policy to be brought into public ownership. I mean, I believe that there are some things that are so critical to the functioning of the country, to the success and the prosperity of the country, and for the country basically to run itself day to day, that they shouldn't be handed over to the market, and they shouldn't be subject to the daily diktats of the market. I mean, I think there are some things that the market does very well. If I want to book a holiday, I'll go to the free market. If I want to buy a new suit or eat in a restaurant, I'll go to the free market. If it comes to energy supply and heating my home and being able to make sure that the lights stay on, then actually I don't think that should be the responsibility of the market. I think that should be the responsibility of elected governments. Now, of course, Keir Starmer, when he was standing for the Labour leadership, gave a commitment to take energy into public ownership. He appears to have resiled from that in the couple of years since, which I don't think is particularly wise, and I don't think is good for the country. So,
as a Labour member, how does that make you feel? Because it's quite a pivotal position, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think he's given any justification for it really, apart from cost. But he would have known that it would have cost money to nationalise energy back when he made the commitment. I suspect he was playing to very much what was at the time quite a Corbynite party, and thought that in order to win the leadership, he had to make those kind of radical promises, even if he didn't particularly believe in them. But that aside, I think as a matter of principle, it's actually the right policy. As I said at the top of the show, how can it be that in an advanced industrial country like Britain, we don't have energy independence and we're subject to as I say, the caprices and the diktats of the market? And, some of these oil and gas companies are posting record profits, the likes of BP and Shell and British Gas and so on. And I know they have argued that, well, a lot of those profits are not necessarily coming directly from household bills. But the reality is, think about how that plays out politically in the country. People are thinking, I'm struggling to make ends meet. I'm being hit with these incredibly high tax energy bills. How am I going to be able to pay the mortgage and put food on the table at the end of the month? They're not going to be won over by multi-billion pounds corporations who are posting record profits saying, oh, but by the way, a lot of that isn't coming from your energy bill. So we need a proper debate, basically, about what I think has become profiteering on the part of the energy companies, and we need a proper debate about public ownership and securing energy supply going forward in this country.
I was getting a bit worried. We got almost 20 minutes in, you hadn't actually mentioned nationalisation. So,
well, there you go.
I knew it had to come eventually. Arlene, it is a pretty reasonable point, though, isn't it, that actually when it comes to energy, the energy firms aren't making a great deal of profit, are they? We were talking about the breakdown just before we came on air.
Yeah, so the household bill, if you look at that 3,549 figure that has been posted for the cap, they get £63 of profit from that. So I think the point is they're not getting their huge profits that Paul's talking about from household bills, certainly not. And the question, I suppose, then is, should they be using some of those profits to help with the cost of household bills and bills to small businesses? Let's remember those small businesses are going to be under huge pressures. And frankly, that may be a regulation issue. Can they use money from another part of their business to offset the huge price spikes for householders and for small businesses? I don't know the answer to that. That might be a regulatory issue. But let's look at all of those issues. Let's see what we can do to help people in the short term. But in the longer term, we are definitely going to have to look at, yes, we want to get to net zero, but we have to transition in a sensible way so that we don't put people into poverty and we don't put people out of business. That's what we really need to look at.
Absolutely. Well, a certain degree of kind of cross-party unity here on the political correction this morning. But send us your thoughts from home. What do you make of the latest price cap announcement from Ofgem? What do you make of what the different parties and indeed Conservative leadership candidates are saying? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the BBC and comments made this week by former Newsnight host Emily Maitlis. But we want to hear from you. As I said, get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. See you in a few moments.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the political correction. Former Newsnight host Emily Maitlis has hit out at the BBC, saying a rebuke she received from bosses for on-air remarks made in 2020 made no sense. She also alluded to cronyism at the heart of the broadcasting company. Maitlis was accused twice of showing bias against the Boris Johnson government. First, when she discussed the now infamous Dominic Cummings' Barnard Castle trip. And second, after a Piers Morgan retweet where he questioned the government's pandemic response. Let's take a listen to her Dominic Cummings monologue now.
Good evening. Dominic Cummings broke the rules. The country can see that, and it shocked the government cannot. The longer ministers and Prime Minister tell us he worked within them, the more angry the response to this scandal is likely to be. He was the man, remember, who always got the public mood, who tagged the lazy label of elite on those who disagreed. He should understand that public mood now, one of fury, contempt and anguish. He made those who struggle to keep to the rules feel like fools and has allowed many more to assume they can now flout them. The Prime Minister knows all this, but despite the resignation of one minister, growing unease from his backbenchers, a dramatic early warning from the polls and a deep national disquiet, Boris Johnson has chosen to ignore it. Tonight we consider what this blind loyalty tells us about the workings of Number 10. We do not expect to be joined by a government minister, but that won't stop us asking the question.
Well, during a speech last week, Maitlis asked whether the BBC had been purposefully sending a message of reassurance to Downing Street. Paul, what do you make of this story? Is there Conservative cronyism at the heart of the BBC?
Well, I'm on the left, Deanna, but I struggle to agree with Emily Maitlis on this. I've got to be honest. I mean, I've been inside the BBC, I've walked down its corridors, I've met its people. And the truth is, look, it is pretty much stuff full of people with a kind of left-leaning, liberal, cosmopolitan, Remain voting, middle-class, progressive bias. That's the reality of it. And I think that the idea that because every now and then a token right-winger, if you like, is appointed, that the likes of Emily Maitlis then throw their hands up and say, oh, this is an example of how the BBC is in hock to the Conservative Party. No, I'm not buying it, to be perfectly blunt. I think the truth is that cohort of people who I described, who the BBC is chock full of, the reality is I don't think they've ever really reconciled themselves to Brexit. They think Brexit was a result of disinformation, of corruption, of the Russians and all this kind of thing. And they've got it into their heads that actually the BBC has kind of fallen victim to that and has now been captured by the forces of the right, the forces of Brexit and so on and so forth. But it's just not true. I mean, it's simply not true. They can't get over the fact that having had it their way for so long, the likes of Emily Maitlis and those people on the Liberal side of politics, the last few years they haven't had it their own way and they're looking for all kind of sinister reasons for it rather than the fact that their view of society really was just out of kilter with the view of society that millions of people held in this country. So no, I think the comments are a nonsense, quite frankly.
So not very strong views there from Paul. Arlene, what about you? What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, it's laughable, isn't it, to think that there's some sort of Tory agenda going on in the BBC. Certainly not impacting on their output, to put it politely anyway. I mean, there probably is cronyism in the BBC, but it's certainly not a Tory cronyism. It's something, and Paul has already described the sort of people that are there. I think it's quite concerning, though, that some very senior Labour people have praised Emily Maitlis for what she had to say about the BBC, and I find that disconcerting because you have people like David Dimbleby now questioning what she has to say. And I mean, David Dimbleby is not known to be a right-wing Tory, and he's basically saying if instead of delivering a monologue, she had asked those questions, it could have been dealt with differently. But she stated those things as a fact, and that is why she was challenged editorially by the BBC bosses, and she found that difficult to take. I mean, we all long for the days of Lord Reith when we actually had a BBC which considered all viewpoints and considered them in a valid way. So I think Emily Maitlis is trying to justify her time in the BBC. She's now came out of the BBC. She's starting her own podcast with Global. According to the Daily Mail today, cabinet ministers will not be taking part in her podcast because of what she's had to say. I mean, she certainly is very partisan. She's entitled to be partisan. But the question is, was she impartial when she was at the BBC? When a couple of days after she left the BBC, she very clearly showed that she was not impartial. So, I mean, this is the thing. The BBC needs to take a long look at itself. We were told that was going to happen. It hasn't happened, and it still continues.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because when Tim Davies sort of came in, we were told there was going to be kind of fundamental changes. But Paul, we haven't actually really seen any evidence of follow-through on that, have we?
No, not particularly. And going back to what Arlene said about David Dimbleby, we could also cite Andrew Marr, who was a BBC man to his bones, but some years ago gave an interview in which he said that the BBC unquestionably had a culturally liberal bias. So if people like Marr are saying that, you can guess there's some accuracy to it. And I think there were some figures released over the last couple of days where it showed that the 10 people who had made the most appearances on Question Time all voted Remain. So it was people like Ken Clarke and others. Now, bearing in mind 52% of the country voted Leave, and yet the top 10 people who appeared on Question Time were literally all Remain voters. Look, the idea that the BBC is in the pocket of the right wing and some sort of Tory agenda, I just don't think stands up to scrutiny. I'd like to be able to agree with Emily Maitlis politically, but it's just not true, and we have to be honest about that.
Well, send us your views from home. What do you make of Emily Maitlis's comments? What do you make about accusations that the BBC is in the pocket of the Conservative Party? Let us know, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We want to hear from you. Now, over 100,000 Royal Mail postal workers have walked out on strike in a dispute over pay, in the first of 4 days of industrial action, with walkouts also due to take place on the 31st of August and the 8th and 9th of September. The Communication Workers Union, who represent those striking, are demanding a pay rise that more closely reflects the current rate of inflation. And the Royal Mail has said the union had rejected a pay rise offer worth up to 5.5% after months of negotiations. Well, to discuss the walkout further, we're now joined by the Deputy General Secretary of the CWU, Terry Pullinger. Terry, just talk to us first about the reasons for the strike, because often it's reported as just being about pay. Is it that simple, or is there more at stake here?
There will be more at stake, because there's actually two disputes. There's one on pay and there's also one on unacceptable changes that we believe will be not just damaging to our members, but hugely damaging to this magnificent public service. Interesting, I was listening to some of your earlier stuff. You was talking about utilities, etc. Well, we're in a similar situation. On the issue of pay, this has been going on. We wrote to the company in February. We could see the cost of living crisis coming towards us. Obviously, our members had been magnificent during the pandemic. There'd been a £1 billion turnaround in the company's fortunes, and we wanted a quick no-strings pay deal to help them cope with the cost of living crisis, but also wrote at the same time about continuing to deploy our change agreement that was only just over a year old and which had been going very well. And the company disengaged. They didn't come back to us till April. And then suddenly we were confronted with totally unacceptable change and a pay offer which was conditional on them unacceptable changes. And it's continued since. So we haven't just... This isn't knee-jerk action. This has been going on all year, these discussions, and we've reached a point where there's absolutely no movement and no choice but for us to, protest in the only way we can to try and get some decent negotiations going.
I'm going to bring in Paul Embry now.
Terry, I should declare an interest. My brother is a postman and a proud CWU member and supports the strike 100%. Terry, you'll be aware that some companies who are facing wage demands at the moment are using the argument, look, our costs have been hit too. We're suffering from the cost of living crisis. We're not able to pay the wage demands that you're tabling. Is that an argument that Royal Mail could legitimately make?
Well, they're making arguments now about losing £1 million a day, and but everybody knows it's about creative accountancy. Figures lie, liars figure. That really needs to. What we got to understand. So the only measure we can have as ordinary, decent working people is since July 2021, circa £700 million has gone to shareholders. Senior managers have had pay rises, they've had huge bonuses. The CEO got a £140,000 bonus as an example. Some got even more than that. And yet there's no money for the people that did all the work over the last 18 months. So if there's no money, why has all this money been paid out? Why is it, ordinary people can't understand that sort of behaviour. And, we deserve a decent pay rise. We provide a magnificent public service. This is the privatisation. All of a sudden there's this shift. And basically we are very concerned that this is about a break-up of the company, that great public service will gradually get ruined, that the company's only interested in profitable parcels, wants to reduce its workforce. There's some real huge things at stake. So, yes, it started off on pay, and that's what we're taking strike action on now. But we have got a massive mandate on change as well. So there will be more industrial action if those proposals don't change. I'd just ask people to understand this. So we are a democratic organisation. We balloted our members. In excess of 86,000 people voted, and we had 2 yes votes. One was 97.6%, one was 98.7%, 1.3% short of 100% of people voting with their union, despite the company spending fortunes on propaganda. So your postal worker, you just said your brother's one. These are decent people. They don't vote like that unless there's something seriously wrong in the organisation that they work for. And I'd ask people just to bear that in mind.
And Terry, can you just clarify for our viewers and listeners, is the union's position, look, we don't want any change at all. We don't want any negotiations. We're not prepared to entertain any talks over changes? Or is the position, look, give us a pay increase for what we're doing now, and then if you want to have a further discussion about changes, then we're happy to get into that?
No, I welcome your point. I mean, you would know from your brother, but obviously the viewers don't all know. We constantly embrace change. Everyone knows their postal services have changed over the years. We used to do 2 deliveries. We used to be out on the street at 6:30 in the morning. Now it's 1 delivery, etc. Now we deliver later in the day. We got people who work 7 days. The narrative is nonsense. It just suits their position to paint the union that way. At the end of 2020, the start of 2021. The company was predicting losses of between £500 and £600 million. We made an agreement called the Pathway to Change Agreement, mutual interest agreement, taking things forward. We deployed that during the pandemic, revision activity. We deployed more change than we've ever done in that period of time in our history. We deployed more automation than we've done at any time in our history in that short period of time. The company was praising us in their financial reports because it was £1 billion turnaround. Then all overnight, every postal worker has grown 2 heads and won't accept change. It's just absolute nonsense. Our history is riddled with the changes and the way we want to reinvent Royal Mail. We had a policy forum in March when the company had disengaged of how we continue to take this Pathway to Change agreement forward, working 7 days, etc. More people doing 3 and 4 day weeks, covering 7 days, lots of things. A 91-page document of ideas of new products and services that build upon the USO but protect it. So build upon that universal service, which is enshrined in statute, by the way. So only the government can change that. And when it was privatised, these people had a responsibility to look after it. We were privatised as a group. We've got a European international parcel company called GLS. They've now totally detached any cross-subsidy and they're looking at selling that off. This is a corporate raid. Please, I ask everyone, just really give some due consideration here because we will see the end of this great postal service as we know it. And I think the United Kingdom will be less because of that. And people who live in them outlying areas. Next Wednesday, I'm going to Northern Ireland next Wednesday, actually. I'm going to speak to members over in there in Northern Ireland because I know, I've heard the company, things like delivering to Northern Ireland are extremely costly. That's why you need a universal service. Otherwise, the prices would go through the roof for people in Northern Ireland, for people in Cornwall, for any outlying areas, Scotland, Wales, etc. It can't all be about city centres, and that's why this great public service needs protecting. There's enough researchers, there's enough intelligence out there. People should see this for what it is and really think about why would postal workers the people you know, the people you know by name that have served you well, that you applauded and were leaving presents out in the streets for our members and everything else during the pandemic, why would they suddenly turn into these strange people that want to bring down society? It's absolute nonsense. This is a genuine dispute. We're not just fighting for ourselves here. We're fighting for this great public service, which is still relevant and over 500 years old. And the United Kingdom should be so proud of this postal service and do everything they can to protect it. We are reasonable people. We've made endless agreements. Of course, now that we've got two disputes, we understand they may well be resolved, but they'll have to be resolved simultaneously now. But as it goes forward, we are actually seeing what's going on with this postal service. And there's huge rumours out there at the moment about a massive takeover from shareholders. We've been in talks with management who have told us the rules of this company's existence now is to serve shareholders. Our members are at the bottom of the list, closely followed by the public. Please wake up and understand this is a genuine dispute and one we are extremely serious about.
Well, Terry Pullinger there joining us from the Communication Workers Union with a call to arms about why we should be supporting the Royal Mail workers. Terry, thank you for your time with us this morning. Paul, I just want to come to you because, you know, we are seeing an awful lot of strikes taking place over this summer. And, of course, there were the Mick Lynch comments earlier on this week about how, you know, the entire union movement should come together to redress the balance in society. Now, it strikes me that the kind of Mick Lynch approach and that sort of more politicised union movement isn't reflective of what it is that the CWU are looking for there, is it, in terms of actually supporting their members?
I think there's a broad consensus that the economy is fundamentally unfair. I think most trade unionists would believe that. I think there's a broad consensus that what we're seeing is a transfer of power and wealth from the poor to the rich. And that, I think, has exacerbated throughout the pandemic and now as a part of the cost of living crisis. And that, frankly, we need a new economic model. We need a new economic model that doesn't create such huge disparities in wealth between rich and poor, that doesn't just invest everything in financial services and ignore the real economy, ignore the public sector, ignore the productive sector, and has things like closing the gap between rich and poor, tackling regional inequalities, tackling boardroom excesses, increasing the minimum wage, that kind of thing. I think there's huge support out there for that, actually. And what I've been struck by, Deanna, is sometimes you would think that much of the public would be really, really critical of people taking strike action, particularly in essential services. But in my experience over recent weeks, there's been quite a bit of sympathy. You know, with the RMT strike, for example, you see passengers pop up and being interviewed on TV and on the radio who say, look, yes, it is an inconvenience, it's a pain in the backside, but I do understand why they're doing it. And the government ignores that sentiment at its peril. I think support for what's happening at the moment is much wider than some people seem to realise.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. As always, loads of you have been getting in touch. Thank you for doing so. We start off with a little bit about the Conservative leadership. We've got Julie, who says, do we really want a Prime Minister who will waltz off in a huff if he fails to get the job? He's spoken about the joy of serving, but it seems to be all over if he doesn't get what he wants. I assume that's about Rishi Sunak. Paul?
Yeah, but that's interesting, actually, because there's been talk of him possibly disappearing to California because he's obviously got a history with America and stuff. Do you think he's likely to pop off, Deanna?
I have no idea. I mean, certainly that's not what he's saying. He's saying that obviously he'd continue to stay and do his part. I guess the proof will be in seeing what he does next and obviously seeing what the result is because, you know, whilst the polls are the polls, we still don't know until the 5th of September.
And it wouldn't look great, would it? You know, if you aspire to be the Prime Minister of the country, you're going for the leadership contest, you lose, and then you slide off to America. I'm not saying he is going to do that, but I don't think it would be well received.
Optically, not a good look.
No, exactly. On cost of living, Alan says that many pensioners will reach net zero very soon. In our bank accounts. I think that's a real issue, isn't it, the impact on pensioners?
Absolutely. And Arlene, have you got some views for us as well? Oh, I'll do another one quickly before we bring Arlene back. We've got Ray in Tonbridge who says, I sent an email to my MP asking for Parliament to stand up and apologise to the country for the inept way governments of all colours over the last 40 years have managed our energy security. Well, again, coming back to this point that we've said about energy security and how really it does need to be a focus of energy policy moving forward. Sorry, Arlene, over to you now.
Yeah, sure. So Joan is saying abolish MPs' expenses in the House of Lords. Taxpayers should not be paying energy bills for MP second homes. The scandal has to stop. And then John is saying it's gone beyond heat or eat. People will go to bed both cold and hungry this autumn and winter. I think people are now getting very alarmed. We're talking a lot about cost of living crisis, and that has an impact then on how people are looking to the winter time. And people are getting quite anxious about this, Deanna, and that's something we have to watch for as well.
And you mentioned the point, Deanna, off camera, actually, that there's not a lot of focus on businesses, the impact on businesses at the moment. I mean, we've obviously talked about the impact on individuals and households and stuff, but actually, I mean, I've seen tweets from businesses, for example, who have posted screenshots of their predicted energy bills.
Staggering,
Some of them are eye-watering, and you think, actually, this is potentially... Bearing in mind we're on the brink of a recession as well, I mean, this is a real double whammy. That could see lots of bankruptcies and people being laid off. You're then into that downward spiral, which is then difficult to recover from, isn't it?
Yeah, huge issue for businesses. And it was actually reassuring hearing the clip earlier, if you were tuned in, from Nadeem Zahawi saying that some of the packages that they're working up as options for the incoming Prime Minister does include potential support for businesses as well. But clearly we need to see that as quickly as we can, because as Paul said, I mean, some of these small hospitality businesses in particular seeing 5 times increases in their energy bills. And that's not it going from kind of 500 quid to 2.5 grand. That's it going from 10 grand to 50 grand or 60 grand in some cases. I don't want to see people getting laid off because of this. So clearly that support needs to be put in place. So here is a call to arms from all of us that whoever becomes Prime Minister, whoever becomes Chancellor, needs to look at that business support as well. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about channel crossings, because this morning we learned that the number of people arriving in the UK on small boats has passed the 25,000 mark after another 915 crossed yesterday. It's also been revealed that 60% of those arriving in the UK are from Albania. Last Monday, more than 700 out of the record total of almost 1,300 migrants were from the southeastern European country. Well, our GB News Home and Security editor Mark White has more.
Arriving into Dover Harbour, the Border Force vessel Ranger, her decks packed with Channel migrants, most likely to be from Albania. In fact, we can confirm that 60% of those currently arriving into UK waters on small boats are from that tiny nation. In truth, this is a crisis within a crisis, which has so concerned UK authorities It resulted in what amounts to an emergency agreement between the UK and Albanian governments to rapidly remove those with no right to asylum. The British government believes that's likely to be the vast majority of those arriving from what is a peaceful nation on the Balkan Peninsula. We've been told that 6 in 10 of those arriving on small boats at the moment are from Albania. More than 6,000 already this year and growing rapidly. Compare that to just 2 years ago when only 50 Albanians arrived by small boat. Here in the Albanian capital, Tirana, this is also an existential crisis for those in government here as the country faces rapid depopulation. Since the 90s, the population has fallen by more than 15% and now numbers fewer than 2.8 million people. The crisis is most acute in Albania's rural towns and villages, where the vast majority of their young have up sticks and left. In fact, Albania is one of the few nations in the world where there are more of its people living outside than inside the country. As part of the agreement with the UK, Albanian law enforcement officials will be seconded here to the border force processing centres at Dover Harbour and the former RAF base at Manston. We're told they'll help gather intelligence on arrivals and quickly assess those with no right to be here. Officials hope those individuals could be removed within 2 or 3 weeks of arriving. However, there's little doubt asylum lawyers will try to challenge those decisions. Nothing surrounding this growing crisis is ever straightforward. Mark White, GB News.
Well, there we heard a little bit more about the current migrant crisis that we're facing. Paul, I want you to cast your mind back. So I remember when we first started doing the political correction, we were having a lot of conversations about the migrant crossings back when Nigel Farage was sitting right next to me on this sofa. And I remember saying to him, you know, the Home Secretary is doing work on this. We're trying to get more removals arrangements in place. We've got on with Albania. And I remember he laughed and was like, oh, what, you know, Albania, kind of like, what good's that? But actually, surely now we can see the good from that, because if it is the case indeed that an awful lot of the people coming over here are Albanian, if any of those prove to be failed asylum seekers, we do now have an arrangement where they can be sent back to their home country. This is a really good thing, isn't it?
I'm sceptical. My jury's out. The truth is, Deanna, will it happen? I mean, we've had all sorts of promises from the Tory government going back many years about how they're going to get to grips with illegal immigration, and frankly, they just haven't dealt with it. And I think people are right to be sceptical about whether they will deal with it now. I mean, more broadly, I think this is the type of thing, really, that just breaks people's faith in the system. I think we are a tolerant nation. We are an open nation. I think that people, by and large, in this country are open to the idea of welcoming refugees who are genuinely fleeing persecution, as well as a certain number of economic migrants as well. What they don't want is a situation where thousands of people every month are turning up on our shores undocumented, mainly young men in this case. There seems to be very few women and children coming across the channel. And we, you know, as we've learned, as Mark told us, many of them from Albania, which is a relatively peaceful and safe country. And I think the question that many people ask is, look, why are people leaving a civilised country such as Spain, having come from a peaceful country such as Albania, and then turning up on our shores undocumented? We're being asked to believe by partisans in the debate and political campaigners these are all refugees fleeing persecution. The truth is they're not, and we have to have an honest and hard-headed debate about that. But let's see what the government does. I'm not particularly hopeful, to be blunt.
So, Arlene, we heard in that piece there from Mark White that there's going to be, you know, Albanian law enforcement brought into place to work alongside Border Force, and potentially failed asylum seekers could be removed in as quickly as 2 to 3 weeks. Do you think that's likely to happen in a lot of cases, or do you think we're going to keep facing these kind of legal challenges last minute to stop people actually getting on the planes?
Well, it's our system. We have a very good democratic system, but unfortunately, it's now being used in a lawfare type of way to, as Paul rightly says, these are people who are not refugees. They are not even economic migrants. They're people who are coming across because they think they might have a better time in the UK from the country that they're currently in. And I think Mark confirmed earlier on today that we've now over 25,000 this year alone that have come over in these small boats. That is a huge impact on services here in the UK. And, you know, when we talk about waiting lists in the NHS and we talk about not being able to get to see a GP or a dentist, we have to factor that in to the equation, because we are having these people coming in to our country. They are undocumented. We try to put them back to their own country through legal methods, not putting them into a dangerous situation, putting them back to their own country. And yet lawfare is used by people to stop all of that. And it must be so frustrating for the government. I do feel for Priti Patel. She has tried, although many times in vain, to deal with this issue. And I think government's going to have again a radical rethink, given the number of people that are coming over in these small boats.
I think it's such a shame for kind of people who are coming here through legal channels, genuine, you know, people fleeing persecution, genuine refugees. I think that it kind of adds to this sort of, I don't quite want to say distrust, but everyone kind of gets kind of tarred with the same brush when there's so many people coming here through illegal means. I think it's kind of such a shame. Paul, I saw you nod there.
Yeah, and what I think is sad is that the effects of that is that the whole issue of immigration has become toxic again. It's become a running sore in our political discourse, and I think that's really sad because, you know, we've moved on from the days of the 1970s when the National Front were on the march and marching through areas with large numbers of ethnic minority people and harassing them and abusing them and telling them that they didn't belong here. We've moved on from that, and unfortunately, this debate has now taken us back to that poisonous kind of atmosphere, and I think that's sad. It's why we need to get to grips with it.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for many. A few showers around, mainly in the north. Let's home in on that detail for you. So a dry end to the day across southwest England with some bright or sunny spells ahead of dusk. Remaining a little breezy along the south coast, temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius. And a bright evening too across southeast London. Some hazy spells of sunshine, dry for all, an easterly breeze, temperatures the same, about 20. Continuing with the dry theme this evening for South Wales now, plenty of bright or sunny spells ahead of nightfall, temperatures around 21, and a fine and dry end of the day across the Midlands. Plenty of hazy sunshine ahead of sunset.